Welcome to this episode of Turning Grief into Growth, the Journey of Transformation. This is a podcast that's hosted by Greg Jacobs and Don Lipstein. Well, good day, folks. I'm excited about this podcast. You might notice a little something different about my voice. I am actually a little sick. I have a virus I'm dealing with, so I've been trying to get my voice back. So Don, my good old co-host, is probably going to be doing a little more of the lion's share of conversation and talking today, if that's possible for me to step back. But I am
We'll
excited.
see. We'll
Yes,
see.
we will definitely see how it goes. So I'm going to be talking a little quieter and closer to the mic. But Don, I'm going to let you go ahead and introduce Claire, our guest today on this podcast.
Well, thank you, Greg, and good day to all of our listeners. I hope everyone is doing well, and hopefully after this podcast, you'll be doing even better. It gives me great pleasure to introduce one of the finest people I know, Claire Hunter. She's a clinical social worker with nearly 2 decades of experience in bereavement care, including facilitating one-on-one connections where a trained peer mentor supports someone who has experienced loss. In this role, she helped guide the process and provided support to the mentors as they learned to accompany their mentees. She also has specialized training in thanatology, which has deepened her understanding of grief. She is currently completing her clinical licensure while continuing to focus on grief and trauma-informed care. And more importantly, I just consider her a dear friend, colleague. We worked together for 10 years, side by side, and she truly helped me through my grief process. Greg and I have talked about pouring into one another, and Claire has been one of those people that poured into me when I needed it the most. So welcome, Claire, and thank you for being here.
I'm so glad to be here, and it's reciprocal, Don. I hold you in high esteem, and you mean a lot to me as well. And so thank you for having me both.
Absolutely. So if you would just, if you could start off by telling us about your experience with grief.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I mean, I think all of us have had one grief experience or more over the years, and ones that have impacted us maybe more than others. I've lost a lot of loved ones over the years to lung cancer, colon cancer, suicide, very suddenly to heart issues as well. My earliest experience with grief was when my grandfather died of lung cancer. And after that, another family member died of cancer as well. And I was explaining to Dawn a little earlier this week and to Greg that it's weird, but when I think about my experiences with grief and what I remember most and what I continue to see myself focus on is the other people who were also affected by those losses. So I have a distinct memory of my mother just going above and beyond to do whatever she could to make my grandfather comfortable while he was facing this illness, and trying to find, different options to keep him here longer. And I think about that, and I think, that's love, right? You see that sort of response to someone being ill, and you think to yourself, I mean, someone would be lucky to have someone like that by their side. And then the other thing is this thing of I see my mother going through this, and or any other family member, my father for the same thing, other loved ones who've experienced loss, sudden loss, but this desire to want to help, right? I see this person going through this experience, and I think to myself, well, I feel it too, but what can I do for them? What can I do for this person? It's this notion of caring for the carer, so to speak. And I've always felt that way, that I want to be there for the other person who's hurting. And initially, I think, when we're not as familiar with grief and we don't know what it entails and the journey, or some people prefer the trek. I know journey and trek are, different terms that I've heard along the way. But when we hear that grief journey and that, you think, oh, I want to take it away for them. I want to ease the pain. I want them to not feel anything, right? This is this thing, like, we have this human nature to want to make sure people don't feel these hard feelings. But like you've said in these previous podcasts, and as we know, like Don was talking about Alan Walfelt, and he says grief is in order to heal, you have to feel, right? And then another person with the Doogie Center, she's the CEO of the Doogie Center, she says grief is to feel, not to fix. And it's so, over time, you start to understand that the best thing you can do for somebody who's feeling that way is to be present with them. Um, and and I think above all, what's so important, and I think the time that I've worked with Don, and even Greg, when he and I've had the chance to work together as well, is the power of connection. Grief is not something that is easy to do alone, and it's better to do it with experienced therapist, a mentor, or a grief support group. Um, and so I've come to understand how important it is to have others with you on that journey. And so I don't know, I know a lot of people run away from grief and they're scared to talk about it, and I've just kind of run toward it.
Listening to you share your grief experience with, your family and how you cared so much about them, like you were thinking more about them than your own grief experience. It kind of seems like a natural progression into what you're doing now, right? With the work that you've been doing and that you continue to want to do. And I didn't mention, but, Claire is our first international guest. She is calling in from France, where she resides, and I just think, to have that connection, as you say, the French connection.
Mhm.
um, uh, Grateful to have that. So thank you for bringing that up.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Connection's important. Connection's important. And I think in this ever-evolving world of technology, um, I wonder how connection's going to change, you know, with technology, with connection, and how that it's going to affect our connections with other people. That's another thing that I think about pretty frequently as well.
I want you to segue into that here in just a second. Claire, I wrote a couple things down that I just wanted
Absolutely.
to kind of comment on from what you had mentioned. I've seen T-shirts with this quote, and it's really kind of controversial because it can go both ways. I am not broken. Stop trying to fix me. And that doesn't
Mm,
have to be grief. That could be trauma. That could be, divorce, whatever.
hmm
Um, so I think there's an essence of a stigma against brokenness as well. But there's also the stigma against, trying to piece back the puzzle and trying to
hmm
fix somebody. And to that, I would say that in many ways, I am broken.
hmm
And I can totally understand that, putting the pieces back together, and others
hmm
trying to fix me. But then there's the other aspect where I'm like, man, I'm just a little crackled. Kind of on, I wrote an article recently on Raku pottery and how it crackles
hmm
in its finish. But just the whole aspect of people, there's a lot of fixers out there, and men especially can tend to be fixers. Not trying to break that out separate from women. I know as a man, I'm a fixer. I should say is my personality probably.
Mm,
And that's kind of a dilemma that we have out there with grief because usually the people trying to do the fixing can't empathize. And there's nothing there. And one of the things you said is there's a desire to help. So you have that desire on the other side of somebody that maybe is not experiencing that grief, wanting to help. And then you have what you had said, what I call the gift of presence,
yeah.
just being there physically
Yeah.
with that. So I just want to call that out because I think there is a brokenness, but it's also something that it doesn't have to be fixed. It doesn't have to be remedied. It has to heal and it has to grow,
Mm-hmm.
not completely. And
Yeah.
it's going to look a little different. But I think there's just kind of a twisted mentality, especially in America, with that. Does that make
Yeah.
sense, Don? Am I communicating that correctly?
I think you are. I think, you know, the fixing piece is it's just not going to happen. That we are broken, but we heal from our brokenness. And it's the grief, and we've talked about this before. It's always going to be there.
Yeah.
It's always going to be there. It just changes and it softens and
Exactly.
it doesn't, and I think like what Claire was referring to, if you have people walking beside you,
Yeah.
it just makes it easier to get
Yes.
to that place of healing.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head, dude.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I do want to segue into what you were bringing up because you had you had mentioned this to me before, and it was so intriguing. Technology and what technology is doing for
Mm,
grief. And could you
exactly.
talk a little bit about what you've discovered and
Yeah. And I guess I want to like ask a question before I get into that because I want to hear just one thing. Um, if it were possible to do away with grief, what altogether would you say I want grief completely gone forever? Because that is what some of these technologies are attempting to do. They're attempting to get rid of grief completely so that people would never have to face that feeling. And I think it goes back to what you were saying, Greg. It's this desire to not allow people to feel these tough feelings. And I think on the one hand, we might say, yeah, I mean, we don't want anyone to have to go through grief. It's a terrible thing.
do,
But
do,
but
I,
to
I,
what extent, what are your thoughts on that before you even segue into the next
yeah,
piece?
I think it's a great question. And when I look back on my grief trek, as you so aptly put, and I kind of like that word better than journey. Um, but I feel like through my grief, I have learned so much more about life than what I ever could have learned prior to, and I don't believe I would have learned it if it hadn't been for my grief.
Yeah.
So do I do feel there's a good place for grief that
Mm,
we don't want to, you know, move away from that.
yeah.
That's my personal opinion.
Yeah.
Love to hear what you have to say, Greg.
Yeah, it's a sticky wicket.
Mm-hmm.
It's really so. I'm gonna approach this from the Judeo-Christianity standpoint as a
Mm-hmm.
Christian. So the Apostle John writes in Revelation where basically we're not going to have mourning, and He's going to take away our tears and grief when we get to heaven. So I believe personally that there will be no more mourning, there will be no
Mm-hmm.
more tears, there will be no more grief.
Mm-hmm.
As far as taking that away on earth, I don't think it's possible.
Yeah.
I think that there's a lot of substitutes, and I think there's a lot of attempts to try to make reality artificially. And we're getting ready to
Mm-hmm.
talk about AI a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
But to Don's point, I am a better man because of what I've gone through. So this is the dimension or parallel dimension I'm in right now. So
Yeah.
can it be taken away in this dimension? No,
Yeah.
it can't. And I think that I have made peace with that. I'm okay with that. Am I
Mm-hmm.
okay with not being reminded of that in another dimension in heaven? Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that I'm wiser
Mm-hmm.
because of what I've gone through. Not just because of what I've gone through, but because I've put the work in the growth has transpired because of it. It doesn't just
Right.
come about naturally with time.
Exactly. And you've said this in previous podcasts. It's
Yeah.
not something you can just kind of ignore, right?
Don and I love it whenever people listen to our podcast and comment on it. That gives us affirmation. At least one person has listened to our podcast, Don.
More than
Claire,
one for
thank you.
sure.
Thank you for being that listener.
That's right.
As you were talking, Greg, it truly, reminded me that I do believe I'm a much better version of myself now than I was before. And would I give anything to have Joshua back? Yes, I
Of
would.
course. Of
But
course.
I, I don't want that version of myself back. I like who I've become.
Mm.
And I feel like I listen more. My heart is more open, and that's part of why I'm able to learn so much through my
Yeah.
grief is that
Yeah.
we open up. And
Yeah.
I think I personally was closed, but I've opened up since.
Yeah.
Just real quick, I would say in year two, I would make the comment all the time. I am a better man since David died, and I'm a worse man since David died.
Mm.
And the two were contradictory statements to each other, and people couldn't comprehend that. Now in year five, I don't say I'm a worse man as much as I did back then. There are still some things like lack of, stress tolerance, maybe a
Yeah.
little more anxiety, maybe some more health issues type thing. But I'm working through those things. So I'd say the majority is I'm a better man because of what
Yeah.
I've overcome.
Yeah. Yeah. And I had a feeling that that would be the response too. And I asked the question because, to go back to the idea of how technology intersects with the grief, um, sector, so to speak. You have a whole bunch of, people who are, or companies that are trying to create avatar versions of someone's loved one. And they're using the pictures that family members might send to these certain companies, voice notes, mannerisms, to recreate a version of their loved one to allow grievers to continue connecting with their loved one. And, in grief, we always talk about continuing bonds, right? You maintain these bonds with loved ones, even though they're physically not here, but there's ways, like you mentioned, Greg, you're wearing your son's hat. That's a continuing bond, but this is a different version of a continuing bond where you're talking to another version of your loved one. Um, and on the one hand, I think there's a lot of short-term um, relief that might bring to somebody who's in the throes of grief. Um, but I also wonder how could affect someone long term, um, and how it may throw the grief process on its head. Like, how is it going to change what we currently know about grief? What I mentioned earlier about the power of connection, right? When we're with another human being, and you're sitting next to a mentor or in a grief group, and you have someone put their arm around you and say, I'm here with you. The gift of presence, that gift of presence of another warm-bodied human being with you to walk alongside, the road with you. And when we change that presence to something that's not technically a warm body, but could be considered a caring presence, whether it be like someone with whom you can talk to about your grief, or whether it's this recreation of your loved one through these services, um, a lot of questions come to mind. And as someone who's been in the field of grief and come to understand what is helpful for people, what I've heard people tell me is helpful. Um, I just, I wonder if that's also going to be helpful for people, you know?
There's there's a movie that came to mind.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you guys remember this movie, but in 2000, Arnold Schwarzenegger was starred in a movie called The Sixth Day, and it was about repet. Like you could take your pet to the mall and you can have them cloned, and that way, when they died, all you had to do was just go and get a second pet. And the name of the organization was Repet. Well, they were actually cloning humans behind the scene, and if they got killed or whatever, then they would just clone a blank. And it's amazing to me. It was 25 years ago,
Mm-hmm.
and now we're in the whole AI age,
Mm-hmm.
where it's not necessarily the physical cloning, but this aspect of trying to recreate a memory
Yeah.
in something. So 5 years ago, I think it was ancestry.com. I could be wrong on that. They came out with an app that allowed you to download or upload a picture of your loved one, and it would animate it, and it would make their face turn and smile,
Mm.
and it was creepy. It was flat out creepy. And I would go on the, on the internet or Facebook or whatever, and I'd read these comments, and people were like, man, that's not my loved one. That was creepy.
Oh.
So I would say that when it comes to AI, it's in the eye of the beholder. But
Mm-hmm.
then in the eye of the beholder, it doesn't necessarily mean it's healthy for that
Yeah.
person. And that's not for me to declare. I just think that it's interesting that we need to study this.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot more that can be done about it.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
I, it brings to mind Dr. Alan Wolfelt again, since you mentioned him, Claire.
Mm.
But he talks about this relationship that we develop after our loved one has died, and that relationship that it continues, but it changes,
Right.
and we by continuing that we integrate our grief into our life, and it just becomes part of who we are.
Mm-hmm.
I have this bond with Joshua that, and some people may think I'm crazy, and that's okay. For me, I totally believe that he's with me, his spirit's with me, and he helps me through a lot of struggles.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and, he might be uh, as far as my spiritual beliefs, part of um, becomes part of my God, my higher power, um, as well as other loved ones that have passed on. And I, I don't know with technology how that would affect my the way I've integrated my grief into my life, and the way I've developed this new relationship with
Yeah.
Joshua.
Yeah.
So that it's an interesting concept, and I do believe it could be helpful,
Mm-hmm.
but I also can see where it could take people down a bad path.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a difference between this connections, really. I mean, you're talking about how you have this different relationship with Joshua. It's a relationship where you talk about him and you have pictures of him, but you don't necessarily have an avatar of him where you're talking with him but again, like Greg was saying too, it's in the eyes of the beholder. So some people are going to
Absolutely.
feed into that and they're going to say, okay, wow, this really reminds me, like this, technology really did a great job of recreating this person I so dearly loved. But there are other people who are going to say, like, no, this is not for me. Um,
The interesting thing with that, Claire, is it's not necessarily the people on the outside that have not experienced the grief that say that. It could be the people on the inside as well. So I think when we talk about grief, we have to be careful because there can be a very adversarial conversation in the fact of, well, I'm the one grieving, you're not.
right, right.
Versus two people that are grieving together, they can have this adversarial aspect too, with like, man, that is weird. Like you used to do a lot of the mentor pair ups for an
Hmm.
organization called TAPS. I was a pair of or part of, still am. And you did an incredible job. I've had five mentees assigned to me. And, I think with that, each person is different. And you
Hmm.
just, not everybody makes a good mentor, not everybody
Right.
has good advice. So, with that, I kind of wanted to share, if I could, my screen.
Hmm.
I have been dabbling with AI, like Gemini Pro, ChatGPT, different
And
things. And for those of
or
you that are on YouTube,
right.
you could see this picture. You're not going to be able to on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, but for those of you that are in YouTube, you could see this. For those that can't, it's a picture of me and my son sitting in a John boat on a lake. And I very specifically told AI how to do this. I wanted some birds flying in the background. There's several cabins on the shore. And there's not a motor on the boat, if you notice that. We're just sitting out there. There's no agenda. There's no, I got to go to this place or that place. But what was interesting to me in playing with this is that is a picture that I had that I uploaded of my son 2 months before he died. So a lot of people say Forever 21, for example.
Hmm.
David was almost 22 when he died. However, I'm getting ready to turn 52 here in a couple weeks. So I wanted to do a picture of what I look like 5 years later with my son, what he looked like 5 years ago, and us in a comfortable, safe place that we really enjoyed. And that was hunting and fishing and the outdoors. This is just, it's a perfect representation of what brings me calm. And it looks just like my son. It's his ball cap that he's wearing in the picture that I uploaded. Um, I showed this to my wife and my daughter, and they didn't like it. They didn't think, they said, well,
Mm.
that's not David. So I think it goes to the point of what we're talking about, that it's not everybody's cup of tea. It's not for
Yeah.
everybody. What might bring some solace and peace to one might not to another. Like, for
Yeah.
example, I love my Google Photos of David's life, but
Hmm.
I cherish the videos of David in action where I can hear his voice and I can see him move around animated more than I do the photos even. And they're, few and far between because I have way more photos. So I can understand the avatar aspect.
Yeah.
I think the aspect of is it healthy is a whole different breakout session, because looking at Google Photos and Google videos of somebody's life that actually happened and occurred and you were there, you took those, versus having a conversation with somebody that is not, is different from what Don's talking about with he takes Josh with him everywhere he goes. I take David with me everywhere I go.
Hmm.
I have conversations with David all the time. People think that's weird. I don't care.
Right.
That's how I keep him alive, not just in my
Absolutely.
memories,
Hmm.
but all around me. So I do think it's healthy to bring it up and talk about it, because there's a lot of people that maybe have those questions that think they're weird or think that they're on an island under themselves, and they're not.
Yeah.
Right.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah,
Um,
I think grief is something that is experienced uniquely by everybody, and
yeah.
what works for one may not work for another, and that's okay. I mean, you're not crazy.
Hmm.
Whatever works best for you, as long as it's healthy.
Yeah.
Because there are unhealthy ways to grieve,
Hmm.
but I think this is a great topic. Thank you for
Yeah.
bringing it up, Claire.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think of also of other situations, and it just came to me as you both were sharing about this topic. But I think of individuals who maybe didn't um, have an easy relationship with their loved one, very conflicted, and still kind of trying to work through the feelings associated with losing somebody that, yes, on the one hand they love, but also had a very maybe contentious relationship with. And so I wonder, now, both of you, I know that that's not the case because, I've heard your stories, but I'm thinking about these other situations. How would this technology help somebody who needs to resolve a conversation that they never had with their person? Um, and and if it could help in those situations too. And it's just something that came to my mind as you were talking about it
Yeah.
too. I don't know.
That's kind of a brilliant question, and worth researching, right? That's,
Yes.
to check it out and see how that can help. Um,
Yeah.
it's interesting.
Yeah.
I think it's like if you go to marriage counseling and you're one spouse there and the other spouse won't go, and you're talking to the therapist, it doesn't have quite the effect as if the other spouse is sitting on the other side of the couch and you're able to tell them exactly how you feel. When you say that, like Don and I didn't have conflicting relationships with our son, I fully understand where you're going with that. Love David, wholeheartedly. Did have some
Hmm.
conflicting, relationship with him. I talk about that in David's story earlier on in some of the episodes, just about after, post high school, how he got onto drugs and different things,
Yeah.
and working through some of that. So
Yeah.
there was some of those conversations, excuse me, I've had out at the cemetery just talking to his headstone. And I don't know if that would be replaced by an avatar or a bot or something like that. One of the things I think is very important to point out, and this might be interpreted as controversial, Don, not that anything I ever say is controversial, but we are meant to live in the land of the living and,
Yeah.
and not the dead. And that doesn't mean that's not going back on what Don and I just said about taking, Josh with us and David
Hmm.
with us everywhere we go. But when Don mentioned it, unless it can be unhealthy, there is an aspect of a retreating back from the world and society and community where you're only dealing with your inner self or like an avatar only in a room that can, I would say, be interpreted as unhealthy. Because we do need that community. We do need that living. I've had a lot of people I've talked to who've said, "Hey, I'm just cutting off all my past connections
Yeah.
because they don't get it." And I'm like, please don't, because you need them. But you
Yeah.
need to build a new set of connections of people who get it and
Right.
incorporate that into it. And it's now a hybrid approach.
Yeah.
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 What a great circle back around to what Claire started off with, that the importance of connection
Yeah.
and how it helps people get through difficult times, whether it's grief of a loss of a loved one or any other
Hmm.
challenge that might be they might be facing. It's important to have connection with others just to help almost mirror what's going on. Because I can remember going to my therapist and she didn't have to say a thing when I spouted out all this stuff that was so confusing in my head. She did take what I said and she reframed it for me so that I could understand it.
Mm.
But it was the same stuff that was going on in my head. I just didn't understand it. And then she reframed it for me. So I think I'm not really sure why I that came to my head just then, but the connection of other people that can help you do that,
Yeah.
like to that you vent, you let it out. Sometimes just letting it out,
Yeah.
does the trick. But sometimes, if you're with the right people, they can help you to process through it.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the argument that some people make for technology versus this experience that you just shared with somebody who was just there to mirror back some of your feelings, that some might say, well, a grief pot could do that. I could have a conversation with AI and AI will do that. And some people argue that the reason why a technology is more favorable for them to just like talk through these grief feelings or whatever feelings they may be having, but for the purposes of this podcast, let's say grief, they feel that AI is going to be non-judgmental. So they
Hmm.
think to themselves, okay, this is not a real person. This is just a bot. So whatever I say is not going to shock this bot because it's not an actual person who's had experiences or feelings or points of view or whatever it might be. So I can say whatever I want. And I think that that's the fear that people have with maybe sharing with an actual other human being. And I think I want to say to people who are maybe listening is that I understand that fear, but when you find the right person, um, I think it's even that much more special to talk with another human being who's gone through various experiences, um, who might be able to mirror some of those experiences even
Yeah.
better than a grief bot, so to speak.
Yeah. And for those listeners who, may not be going through grief, but may be supporting somebody who is, I
Yes,
feel like that's a really good message. Like if we can step away from our judgment
yes,
and just leave that,
absolutely,
somewhere
absolutely,
else, then
absolutely.
then we're doing a huge,
Yeah.
huge uh, favor and doing something really well.
Yeah.
Again, we're meant to come alongside. We're not
Hmm.
meant to have to fix.
Uh-huh.
I sent a text message yesterday. It was my first mentee that I received from TAPS over 4 years ago, and his son's birthday was yesterday. And I just said, "Hey, just wanted to acknowledge, Hunter's 25th birthday." I never say happy birthday. I never say, I just acknowledge. And he sent me a couple texts back yesterday, and he said, "Man, you have no idea how much just you coming alongside me through the years. I couldn't have asked for a better mentor." And he said, "I've been able to help incorporate the things that you taught me and mirrored for me with my wife and my daughter." And, that affirmation is what I needed yesterday. It just really encourages me because that is what it's all about. It's about coming alongside others. We had Dr. Frank Campbell on a previous episode, and he was just talking about the importance, the vitality that is surrounded by peer support.
Yeah.
And I don't know, bringing it full circle to the AI, I don't know, maybe technology can incorporate some kind of empathy, aspect into that. I go back to Star Trek, and with Data and, them talking about, oh, your humor thing is turned up too much. Let's turn it down or whatever. Who knows what they can come up with? But I don't see a replacement for somebody that has walked that road,
Hmm.
coming alongside others. So,
Yeah.
Absolutely.
But
Absolutely.
AI can teach us, it's a good learning point. And so
yes,
if people are going to AI because they're not judgmental, it's not
Hmm.
judgmental, then we can do better by not being
that's
judgmental.
right.
Yeah. 100%.
Yeah.
100%.
Well, Claire, is there any final words you would like to have?
I'm s- I've said a lot already, but I just I think I'm just gonna highlight again what I kind of said previously is in what we just said a few moments ago, but the power of connection. So on that note, I want to say I'm happy to have connected with both of you today.
Mm,
I hope that we were able to connect with people in the audience via this topic. I think it's one that's ever evolving. Technology isn't going anywhere. AI is, we are in the throes of it. And I am curious to see where it goes. It's an area that is of deep interest to me as it relates to grief and bereavement. Um, and I don't know if your audience is able to make comments, but I would invite the audience to maybe if they've ever utilized some sort of technology like this, if it's been a one-off thing or if they've done it consistently over a period of time, I'd be interested to hear what your
yeah.
audience has to say about this topic because like I said, it's evolving. We're in it. We're in the throes of it.
Yeah.
And it'd be interesting to see if people have felt a connection to that technology as it relates to their grief or if they haven't.
Yeah, it's not going away.
Nope.
Mm-mm.
It's here.
It is. But I'd much prefer to connect with the two of you than with a grief bot or a
Same here.
machine. So,
Yeah,
Don, do you have any final
ditto.
comments?
No, just I'm so grateful to you, Claire, for joining us. I, this is the kind of episode that I kind of have dreamt of when I thought about doing a podcast. I didn't know what that looked like the first time, I thought about it. I asked Greg if he'd be interested and he gave it some thought and he's like, yeah, let's do this. And I couldn't be more grateful to him for saying yes and wanting to partner with me. But then we find guests like you, Claire, and it just, it just makes it like, wow, this is definitely what we're supposed to be doing.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Well, absolutely. And
Absolutely.
continue to do what you're doing. I love it. I love it. And I can't wait to see what else you have in store. I think you're talking and speaking to a lot of people, whether you may know it or not. Maybe they're not commenting, but I think people are listening. So thank you for what you do.
Well, we sure appreciate that affirmation as well. And as far as AI goes, I choose not to go into the future in fear. I definitely have a healthy wisdom and skepticism about things, but I've learned to embrace life and not worry about it putting me out of work, or it's going to kill off the human race or whatever. There's a lot of fear mongering going on out there. So with that, like anything in life, let's bathe it in wisdom and just move forward with eyes wide open. So, Dawn, thank you so much for co-hosting. I couldn't agree more with your words. And Claire, thank you so much. It was a pleasure talking with you today.
Pleasure for me too. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to listen. We hope turning grief into growth spoke to your heart and becomes a part of your own journey of healing and transformation. If you know someone who could use a little hope, please share this episode with them. And don't forget to follow, like, or subscribe on your favorite platform so you don't miss what's coming next. Dawn and I can't wait to share more conversations to help you keep turning your grief into growth. Until next time.